A quorum is present. The hearing of the Workforce Protection Subcommittee on the Family and Medical Leave Act, extending coverage to military families left at home, will come to order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 12A, any member may submit an opening statement in writing, which will be made part of the permanent record. I now recognize myself, followed by Ranking Member Joe Wilson, for opening statements. So I want to thank everybody who's here today, who is coming to listen and coming to participate in this very important hearing. My remarks will be brief. We want to hear our distinguished witnesses. We don't want to hear me. But I want to say something about the Family and Medical Leave Act, which is intended to help individuals balance their family and their work obligations. 90 million working people are now eligible for unpaid protected leave for up to 12 weeks a year. When the act was passed in 1993, it was a huge, giant step, and it's of great importance to working families still today. A majority of military spouses work outside of the home, and they too must balance work and family, among other things, to put food on the table and provide support for the needs of their family. But they face additional challenges because their lives have been disrupted by many things, by multiple deployments, by involving not only active service members, but those in the National Guard and the reservists. There is so much that faces the military family that the very least we can do is pass this legislation. The conflicts of Iraq and Afghanistan have resulted in almost 30,000 casualties. I think it's more, with many service members being very, very seriously wounded. These wounded warriors need substantial support. They need care from their families. And they also often need this care for long periods of time. Some need the care permanently. So no matter where we come down on the merits of these conflicts, we must help the families involved. Families who include not only spouses, but parents, children, and others. We must help them support their loved ones who are putting their lives on the line for us in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, this current administration has let down our returning service members, and we need to reaffirm our commitment to these brave men and women. Therefore, I'm honored to have introduced H.R. 3481, the House companion to Senator Dodd's and Senator Clinton's legislation S. 1975. This legislation amends FMLA to provide 6 months of leave for spouses, children, parents, and other next of kin to care for injured service members. This legislation incorporates one of the recommendations of the President's Commission on Care for America's Returning Wounded Warriors, chaired by Secretary Shalala and Senator Dole. It's the least we can do, and hopefully we can do much, much more. So I look forward to your testimony of Panel 1 and Panel 2. And I yield to my ranking member, Mr. Wilson. And we're going to try then to have you heard before we go vote, Senator.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair. When they arrive, I want to welcome each of our witnesses, and indeed, Senator Dodd, I'm confident we can stay through and hear your testimony. We want to welcome our colleagues from the other body, our colleague in the House, my good friend and hall neighbor, Mr. Issa, and of course our witnesses on the second panel, in particular Ms. Wade, who does us a great honor by being here today. As a 31-year veteran of the Army National Guard and the grateful father of 4 sons currently serving in the military, I understand the challenges of our military families that they face each and every day. They deserve our utmost respect and admiration. Earlier this year, President Bush, by way of executive order, created the President's Commission on Care for America's Returning Wounded Warriors. The commission, led by former Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole and former Secretary of Health and Human Services Donna Shalala, examined and made recommendations to improve the care, benefit, and support provided to America's wounded servicemen and women. In July 2007, the Commission delivered its final report to the President. One of its recommendations was that Congress amend the Family and Medical Leave Act to provide extended care to relatives caring for combat-related injured service members. President Bush has endorsed this recommendation. Indeed, no one in this room could find a more worthy goal than ensuring workers are not forced to choose between their job and caring for an injured family member who has served his or her country. I am particularly interested today in hearing testimonies from our witnesses regarding their reasons for supported and expanded leave for military caregivers. Additionally, I hope they will share their views on the various other proposals before Congress. Finally, I want it noted for the record, today's hearing is one of the first in this Congress where we have begun to look at the Family and Medical Leave Act. This statute, which now has been on the books for almost 15 years, is working well in some instances, but not as well in others. We are all united in our support of military families today, and that makes our task of legislating easier. But I would caution my colleagues that there are a number of policy issues surrounding the Family and Medical Leave Act that do not lend themselves to unanimous support. I hope that after today, this subcommittee and our committee as a whole does not shy away from that debate, but rather turn to face some of the tough questions that have arisen under the law. That is the debate for another day, but one that we must commit to having. With that, I look forward to today's testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I now have the honor of introducing our distinguished first panel and to welcome Senator Dodd, and I think we'll probably drag Representative Issa up from after the votes, but we will get to hear from the senator first. But I think you know that the lights, you've worked here, you know the green light means go, and the yellow light means you're almost finished, and the red lights means wrap it up as soon as you can. And we're going to hear from Senator Dodd first. Senator Christopher Dodd is the senior senator from Connecticut who has tirelessly fought for 7 years and did that before the enactment of the Family and Medical Leave Act, which was signed into law in 1993. As the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Children and Families, the senator has continued to help working men and women by authoring the Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act and the Family Leave Insurance Act, which would provide paid leave for employees. Earlier this year, he worked closely with Senator Clinton and a bipartisan coalition of senators to write S. 1975, the Support for Injured Service Members Act, which would help provide 6 months of family and medical leave, as I said, for military families. Senator, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and it's good to be back in the House.
It's good to have you.
I mean, started out here with a head of black hair a number of years ago. To come back here and to return to the House is always a pleasure. I always said the ideal job in politics would be a 6-year term in the House. That always gets an applause on the House side, I can tell you. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting us to come by today, and delighted to be able to participate in this hearing and to encourage support for this very important piece of legislation. Congressman Wilson, it's good to be with you as well, and other members of the committee who come out here this morning, or this afternoon rather, to hear this testimony. I'm very proud to have worked, as you pointed out, with former Senator Bob Dole, the Majority Leader, on this legislative effort to expand the Family and Medical Leave Act, and I'll apologize in advance, and I regret I've read the testimony, and I want to thank Sarah Wade, particularly. It's not an easy thing to come before a congressional committee and talk about matters as personal as your family and what she's been through and what her husband's been through, particularly what her husband's been through, and recognize that someone lost a job because they were taking care of their spouse coming back from a theater of conflict and war where they've given everything on behalf of our country, whether you agree or disagree with the policies. None of us have anything but the highest admiration for those who are serving in very difficult theaters of conflict. And so to you, Ms. Wade, Mrs. Wade, we thank you immensely. I want to thank Jessica Perdew as well from the National Military Family Association for her work and the work of her association on behalf of military families. And Debra Ness is a wonderful friend for many, many years and was very instrumental and involved with Family and Medical Leave from the National Partnership for Women and Families. I want to thank them as well. I know they're your second panel coming up here. Madam Chairman, I'll ask consent that the entire context of these remarks be included in your record, and I'll try and just paraphrase as much of it as I can to move things along for you.
Without objection.
And I appreciate asking me to, asking Bob Dole to ask me to draft this legislation to implement one of the key recommendations, as I'm sure all of you know, to put forth by the President's Commission on Care for America's Returning Wounded Warriors. And as co-chairs of the Wounded Warriors Commission, Senator Dole and the former Secretary of Health and Human Services, Donna Shalala, deserve our gratitude, and I think all of us commend them for their thoughtful work in developing the Commission's report. I also want to take a moment to note that I'm both pleased and extremely grateful for the bipartisan support from Senate colleagues. We spent a lot of time talking about the divisions that exist here. Not enough time is spent on the matters where we actually work very closely together to get a job done. You've already mentioned my colleague from New York, Senator Clinton, who's been deeply involved in these issues and cares about them very much and has for many, many years here. And I'm grateful to her for her participation and support, along with Senators Dole today and Senators Graham and Kennedy, Chambliss, Reed of Rhode Island, Senator Mikulski, Senator Murray, Senator Salazar, Senator Lieberman, Menendez, Brown, Nelson of Nebraska, and Cardin, and I presume others as well. They're all part of this effort here to bring this bill to the successful unanimous adoption by the United States Senate as part of the Children's Health Insurance Program a few weeks ago. As you point out, Madam Chairman, 14 years ago, I started on this journey of family and medical leave, and I'd be very remiss, particularly in this body, if I failed to mention the name of Patricia Schroeder, who was really the person who originated the idea. That day of the bill signing in February of 1993, she was not included to stand on the podium at the Rose Garden at the White House. And I've always regretted deeply, because she should have been there. She was really the person who initiated the idea. I authored the bill in the United States Senate, and as you pointed out, it took 3 presidents, 7 years, and 2 vetoes to end up with the bill. And I should point out that it never would have happened without the support of Arlen Specter, of my good friends as well, Kit Bond of Missouri, Dan Coates of Indiana. Senator Kennedy was tremendously influential. It was a bipartisan effort. It took a long time, but we ended up adopting that legislation. And today, 14 years later, 50 million Americans have been able to take advantage of this protection of caring for a sick loved one, recover from an illness, or welcome a new child into the family, among other things. And after that many of time, we see that the debate is no longer about whether Americans have a right to its protections, but rather about how best to expand those rights. And I can say without reservation that no one is more deserving of those protections than those who risk their lives in the service of our nation. Most of all, of course, wounded soldiers deserve the care of their closest loved ones. That is exactly what we've offered in the Support of Injured Servicemen's Act, what you're proposing here, and what was recommended by the Commission, headed by Senator Dole and Donna Shalala. It should come as no surprise that the Commission found that family members play a critical role in the recovery of wounded service members. In fact, Madam Chairman, I'll never forget Dr. C. Everett Koop, who was one of the critical witnesses. It was one of those votes I regret having made. I voted against Dr. Koop when his confirmation was up years ago in the Senate. And after he retired, I wrote a letter and put it into the congressional record apologizing for the vote. He turned out to be a remarkable Surgeon General. And one of the things he did was to come and stress and testify very forcefully, contrary to administrative position, as someone who is a pediatric surgeon, the importance of having family members around during time of recovery, and made eloquent testimony some 15 or 16 years ago about the importance of family members being with a loved one as you go through the recovery from an illness or an injury. And certainly that's what we're trying to do here and achieve for people coming out of the theaters of conflict. The commitment shown by families and friends of our troops is truly inspiring. According to the Commission report, and these 2 numbers I found rather startling, that 33% of active duty service members report that a family member, a close friend, had to relocate in order to be with them during the periods of recovery, and that 1 out of 5 actually lost their jobs as a result of doing so, much as you're going to hear from Sarah Wade here. I think those 2 statistics had a lot to do with the recommendation by the Commission. The idea that people have to relocate to take care of a loved one, and that as many as over 20% actually lost employment as a result of making that decision. In fact, the Commission's report points out, and I quote them, it says, in virtually every case of a wounded serviceman, a wife, husband, parent, brother, or sister has received a heart-stopping telephone call telling them that their loved one is sick, injured from halfway around the world. These loved ones bear a tremendous burden, and to add that the fear of losing their employment or their jobs is more than one should demand from these families. How could we be unmoved by the story, as I said, of Sarah Wade, whose husband lost an arm and suffered severe traumatic brain injury in Iraq? Mrs. Wade was fired from her job for spending too many months helping her husband recuperate, because she had, to quote her employer, a lot going on, end of quote, in her life. It's true, thousands of families like hers will have a lot going on in their lives until the day their soldiers' recoveries are complete. They will have a lot going on because their loved ones sacrificed parts of their bodies for our country. At the very least, we can give those families is the assurance that Sarah Wade never had, the assurance that when they have returned from caring for the wounded, their jobs will still be there for them. And with an all-volunteer military, supporting our military families is more essential today than ever. I, too, Congressman, served in the National Guard and Army Reserves. Thomas Jefferson was president when I did in those days, going back. But the old saying here, we recruit soldiers, but we retain families, is an old saying, but has true merit and value. And certainly, this point we're making here today emphasizes that particular point. That's why the Commission recommended that family and medical leave be expanded to provide family members of combat-injured servicemen up to 6 months of leave to care for their loved ones, and those 6 months are vital. According to the staff at Walter Reed, 6 months is the average length of time an injured service member needs to recover self-sufficiency. So the period of 6 months was not taken arbitrarily out of thin air. It was a number derived from those at Walter Reed who gave us the indication, or gave the Commission the idea the amount of time would be necessary. For the first time, this bill offers family and medical leave not just to parents, spouses, and children, but to next of kin, including siblings. Families, not the government, should decide for themselves who takes on the work of caring for their injured loved ones. This legislation recognizes that fact, and it's a major accomplishment in this bill. But it's just a first step, in my view, in supporting and the support that our military families need. Since its passage in the Senate, I have sought to expand, as you pointed out, family and medical leave to include more employees, particularly in small businesses. When we wrote the legislation initially, I set the standard pretty high because we are going through a difficult time, and I stuck with those numbers even when Congress changed in 1994. But nonetheless, to expand that definition of who is a caregiver, what we've done here, and also to provide some means of providing paid leave. A staggering number of people who would otherwise qualify and need a leave could not afford to do it for the periods necessary. So we're trying to fashion, in a bipartisan fashion, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska has been very cooperative and helpful with me on this particular point of trying to fashion a paid leave proposal. And we hope to have something to present fairly shortly in that regard. For many years, I've worked to build on the proven success of the Family and Medical Leave Act, and have been driven by my strong belief that more Americans are deserving of its protections. Certainly, I continue these efforts and seek additional resources for our military families, such as comprehensive child care, but we'll focus on passing this bill as soon as possible. I deeply appreciate the partnership of Chairman Woolsey in this regard, along with Chairman George Miller, who introduced companion legislation, along with that which was done in the Senate. I'd also like to recognize Congressman Altmaier, who I understand was very involved in this as well. And I want to commend him for his work on behalf of expanding family and medical leave for our military families. Our full debt to our troops is unpayable, of course, but perhaps the best thing we could do for them is to get out of the way, to make it possible for the love of a family to help heal their wounds. What this legislation does, then, is to break down the barriers between our troops and the care they need most. In conclusion, Madam Chairman, the support for injured servicemen offers just one of the critical ways in which we can better assist our military families. In a few moments, you're going to hear from a group of people who truly understand the challenges facing our soldiers and their families. They have my admiration and my gratitude, and I look forward to working with all of them, including, as I said earlier, my longtime ally in so many of these issues, Debra Ness, of the National Partnership for Women and Families. Together we can provide critical support, I believe, for working families who sacrifice so much for the collective safety and security of our country. And I'm deeply grateful to the subcommittee for giving me a chance to talk about the issue and to thank all of you for your commitment to this cause as well.
And we thank you. We're not going to ask questions because we have to go vote.
Understand that?
But, Senator, we know how busy your schedule is, and we thank you for your participation. We thank you for authoring this legislation, and I'm honored to be your House partner on that.
Look forward to working with you.
And for everybody to know, we're going to try to get Representative Issa back here with us, and Senator Clinton will be showing up sometime during the hearing.
Well, thank both of them for me as well.
I will. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's great legislation.
Nice to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.